Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I'm going to answer one of the biggest questions about the rising of the shield hero. Does the red-haired devil ever get what she deserves? And yes, since I started doing shield hero content and had her on screen next to me, I have noticed I do look a bit like her, but it's just coincidence, I promise. Now, as I said in the last video about Raphtalia and Naofumi's relationship, the light novel series that the anime is adapting is very different from the web novel for Shield Hero, and I always focus on the light novel canon because that's what most people watching the anime will care about. However, in this video, I will be talking about what happens to Myne in both the web novel and light novel versions, because the differences between them are interesting and it's a part of the web novel a lot of people talk about. This means there will be major spoilers for every canon of Shield Hero that exists, so you have been warned. But before I get onto what Worst Girl does next, and whether or not she ever actually pays for her actions and just bloody dies, I want to talk about this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. As the first game to bring a true console experience to mobile, Raid Shadow Legends has raised the bar for what a dark fantasy RPG can look and play like on your phone, and there's never been a better time to start exploring it. With over 600 champions, all with unique skills, and hundreds of artifacts to equip, Raid offers literally millions of tactical combinations. You can play your own way as you build up your champions to take on raid bosses, dungeon runs, campaign battles, and PvP arena matches. Now, since you're on my channel, you probably care about characters, and one of the best things about Raid is the sheer range of beautifully designed champions, so I want to show you a couple of my favourites. The first is Sile of the Drakes, who I love not just because I'm a sucker for barbarian type fighters, but also because of her versatility. Wherever you want to take her within the game, she just works. Add to that her cool design featuring insane abs, and the fact that everyone gets her for free, and it's easy to see why she's the most popular legendary champion in Raid. But if you like the idea of a high elf who hits like a nuke with an insane area of effect skill that targets all enemies and always crits, then I've got to recommend Ithos. Ithos is so fun to play with when he's built up with crit rate and crit damage, and he's highly recommended against the Hydra. So, what's new in Raid? Well, the game has just celebrated its 3rd anniversary, and they went hard with the celebrations, adding new champions, artifacts, and other new content, as well as holding events and being very generous with free gifts for players. But the celebrations aren't slowing down, and right now is an amazing time to get started with Raid, with a bunch of special events and tournaments going on, and some of the best prizes in the game's history, like awesome champions, piles of shards, and all kinds of other special bonuses. And if you want to get into Raid while all of this is going on, as a viewer of my channel, you can start with an exceptional free starter pack worth almost $40 by clicking the link in the description or scanning my QR code, which is on screen right now. Do that and you'll get 3 free champions: Tiger Soul, Romero, and Misericord. Plus, you'll also get 10 Magic XP brews, 10 Force XP brews, and 10 Spirit brews to help you start building them up. This is an exclusive offer for new players and is only available for the next 30 days. So definitely click the link or scan the code to make sure you get these great rewards. And I'll see you in the game. And now back to Myne. And I will be calling her Myne because, as always, I don't want to upset YouTube by saying her official names a bunch of times, and because I think Malty is a stupid name. So, a common complaint people make about Shield Hero in the anime is that things felt like they lost their edge once Naofumi's name was cleared and Myne and Trash had been punished. A lot of people felt that the revenge type plotline was what was compelling about the series, and that once it had a resolution, it just wasn't as distinctive anymore. But there are 2 things to answer that, really. One is that while it may have seemed like it at first, Shield Hero isn't really a revenge story. It starts out with that as a plotline, but it's not really the story that's being told, or even the genre that it's intended to be. It was never intended to be something like Redo of Healer, where revenge is the driver behind the whole plot. Instead, Shield Hero more follows a Shanja-style story structure, where it's about someone rising up from an extremely low status to a godlike one. And the stuff that happens in the beginning is about knocking Naofumi down to the most difficult possible starting point, while also setting up antagonists that it'll be satisfying to see him overcome as he increases his power and status. The clue is really in the title. It's about the literal rising of the Shield Hero. But the other counter to people saying it stopped being interesting after the trial is that, well, Myne's role as an antagonist is far from over, and she's gonna keep on making you hate her for a long time to come. See, currently, as far as we know in the anime, she's still in Motoyasu's party, and other than her name change and losing her status as a princess, she's gotten off pretty lightly. Motoyasu is still supporting her, and from her attempt to poison Naofumi after the trial, we know she isn't exactly a changed woman, or even living in fear of serious repercussions if she acts against him. She does have the slave crest that limits her in a lot of ways, but that's about to basically stop working, and so the Queen won't be able to use that to control her anymore as of the aftermath of the Spirit Tortoise arc. And it is after the events of the Spirit Tortoise arc that she starts becoming active in the story again. First of all, she abandons Motoyasu, moving on to Ren, the sword hero, and then Itsuki, the bow hero, and betraying and mentally breaking each one of them. I go into a lot more detail about how she does this and what the effects are in my video about the 3 other heroes, so I won't repeat all of that here. But the important thing is that she is actively working to screw over each of the heroes one by one, and she is the cause of each hero unlocking Curse series weapons. Naofumi and other characters among his allies like Rishia and Eclair are able to bring Ren and Itsuki round and get them over the emotional damage, but Motoyasu actually remains insane for the rest of the story so far, as a result of the effect she had on him. Again, the full story on that is in my video about the heroes, so I'm just giving a high-level overview of that part of the plot so we can get on to what she does next. Now, the Spirit Tortoise arc was also important in that it introduced the first of a new type of antagonist into the series, in the form of Kyo, the guy from Glass's world who was controlling the Spirit Tortoise. He himself isn't relevant to the stuff with Myne, but the point is that we will see other characters quite similar to him starting to crop up and mess with the heroes. These Kyo-type characters are all people who are referred to as vanguards of the waves, because they are working for the entity that is causing the waves to happen. At the current point in the light novels, this entity is known only as someone who assumes the name of God. They're basically the big bad in the whole thing. In the web novel, they are an evil goddess named Medea, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute because in the web novel canon, Myne is actually a kind of fragment of this evil goddess herself. But I think it's quite likely that the big bad, their connection to Myne, and many other things about the ending will be different in the light novels. And for now in the light novels, we're just starting to find out more about this race of gods, during an arc where Naofumi and many of his allies go back in time to an era where the previous Shield hero lived. In this past era that they're sent back to, the waves were very different, and decidedly more like some kind of Squid Game for gods to watch, and there were a whole race of these godlike beings involved with them. In the present, it's not really clear if there's only one god left or not, but the one causing the waves and meddling with the heroes does seem to be just one entity, and they run an organisation that mainly seems to exist to cultivate chaos in the various worlds affected by the waves, and to hinder the holy and vassal weapon holders. The vanguards of the waves, like Kyo, are actually people from different versions of Japan, just like the heroes, who died in their own worlds and were resurrected and isekai'd to help with this general sowing of chaos. They're all people who were chosen for having a particular type of obnoxious personality. And so, through the different encounters with them, Naofumi notices that they all act in very similar ways and are all similarly awful. They're usually people who have been seen as geniuses, due to their knowledge from other worlds and the various boons given to them when they were resurrected. They all have harems, often of women they have tricked into following them, and they have tools that allow them to steal vassal and even holy weapons from their rightful owners, which can make them very dangerous. They sometimes, later in the story, have some support from some far more competent people associated with the organisation too. But what a lot of them also have is Myne. Being as good as she is at manipulating men, these vanguards of the waves, who tend to be pretty stupid and arrogant, are easy prey for her, and she latches on to several of them, though the first we see her with is probably the one who has the biggest impact on the plot, and his name is Tact. If you have seen my video about Naofumi and Raphtalia, then Tact is the one responsible for the incident with the Phoenix Guardian Beast that leads to the death of Atla, a character Naofumi was very fond of. Now, this leads to a group including Naofumi, Raphtalia and Queen Morelia going to a country called Forbray, which Tact is believed to belong to as a 7-star weapon holder, in order to negotiate with its king. Now, the king is a genuinely horrible guy, known as the Pig King, and I'll talk about why soon when we get to the web novel differences. Now, when they arrive at the castle, the king has already been killed by Tact, who we see that Myne is now working with. Tact proceeds to launch a devastating attack on the party, bringing Naofumi close to death and taking his shield, as well as then declaring war on the rest of the world. It is during this conflict that the Queen is killed, but also that King Trash actually reawakens as his previous self, the master strategist known as the wisest King of Wisdom, and I'm sure there was probably a less redundant way that they could have translated that, but that's what we got. He's also the holder of the staff of the 7-star weapons. Here, Trash, who insists on keeping the name Trash as a reminder of his past foolishness, starts being not just actually useful, but in fact pretty much the GOAT. I'll do a video about him and his redemption, but for now I'm trying to keep this brief. It's mostly thanks to King Trash that Naofumi and his allies are able to defeat Tact, and he and his surviving harem members are sentenced to public executions. Even the king is at this point supporting the execution of Myne, but unfortunately, she and the guy named Mold, who was originally in Itsuki's party, who has been working with Myne ever since the time she screwed over Itsuki, actually escape to another world. This means they escape execution at this time, and Naofumi has no idea when he'll run into them again. However, the Queen had previously sent some spies to follow Myne, and at least one manages to follow her across worlds too, so she's not roaming around as unchecked as she might believe. Now, before I talk about what happens next with Myne in the light novel canon, this is probably the best time to discuss the original execution of Myne in the web novel, as it does kind of tie into the plotline I just described. See, in both the light novel and web novel, Myne was sent to be married to the King of Forbray, the Pig King, as a means of execution. In the light novels, Tact kills the king before this can happen, but in the web novels, Myne does end up being killed by the king. He is a serious sadist, and tortures and kills women who are sent to be married to him. Myne was to be his 10,000th bride. The King of Forbray, who is actually King Trash's brother and older than him by 13 years, so is technically also Myne's uncle, has become kind of a low-key way to sentence highborn women to a very painful death if they cause problems. And all royal and noble women, including even Queen Mirelia, grew up with the fear of one day being married to him. Naofumi wonders if Myne might be able to wheedle even him onto her side though, and so he asks to see proof that she actually has been killed. The king sends Naofumi basically video footage, recorded using magic crystals, that shows him torturing and killing her, which Naofumi watches, though he doesn't really enjoy it, despite how much he hates her. He just wants to check that she's actually dead, but the king gets the impression that Naofumi wanting the video means he's some kind of kindred spirit who's into the same kind of things. Still, something that applies in both the web novel and the light novels is that the god-type beings behind the waves have the ability to resurrect people. So despite her gruesome execution here, where she has her limbs cut off and her eyes gouged out, among other things, Myne isn't actually dead for good. I'll come back to the resurrection thing in just a moment when I talk about how she's been killed in the light novels. Now, Myne's death in the web novel is probably the main incident that leads people to think the light novel version is less dark and edgy, and has been toned down quite a lot. However, while the way Myne is killed for the first time in the light novels is different, it's still worth noting that the King of Forbray as a character who does these horrifying things isn't actually different in the light novels. He still exists, he still has the same predilections, and has still killed thousands of women, and Myne is still supposed to marry him. So the dark stuff around him is still included, it's just that Tact kills him off screen, so Myne never meets her end that way. I feel like it's more that the author thought the way Myne is killed in the light novels worked better for the plot, rather than that they thought the original web novel death was too dark. I think if that was the case, they would have removed the king's sadistic nature as a thing altogether. Equally, Naofumi's reaction to seeing the footage of Myne's fate is still in a way kept, instead showing his uncomfortable feelings at watching the live executions of Tact's harem. He believes it's justified, and he believes he should see it through, but he gets no joy from seeing it, and he finds it disturbing that anybody would, and that public executions were ever a thing in his original world. The characterization of him around the reality of seeing people he hates meet a gruesome end is kept, as is the fact that the ruling classes in this world are into some horrible things. So really, the main difference is just that the light novel version opts to keep Myne active and being hateful in new and interesting ways for a bit longer before the resurrection thing is introduced, and leads to her first death in the light novels being, in my opinion, actually more satisfying due to who kills her. So how does Myne die in the light novels? Well, as I said before, she crosses over to other worlds and starts working with different vanguards of the waves. During this period, most of the time she's in Glass's world. This is where Naofumi encounters her on a few occasions, but she always manages to make a retreat before he can take her out. There is at this point no pretense that anybody wants to take her alive. Everyone, including her father, has accepted that she needs to die, and so Naofumi, the other heroes, and all of his allies are ready to kill her if they can. But eventually, Naofumi ends up in a confrontation with her where he thinks his chance has finally come to kill her, but beside her is a woman he had assumed was just another one of her hangers-on. This woman announces that it's time to die, and of course we think she's talking to the shield hero, but no, she is actually the spy the Queen had following Myne, and she proceeds to brutally kill Myne as Naofumi just kind of feels bemused. Now that may sound like a typical plot twist, not even that surprising, but what makes it really satisfying is that this spy is not a random new character. She was actually introduced in a very early light novel bonus chapter told from Motoyasu's point of view, which was skipped in the anime. She was an adventurer who wanted to join the Spear Heroes party, but Myne took a dislike to her and actually ended up selling her into a life of sex slavery, with Motoyasu thinking she'd simply left the party. It's strongly implied that a lot of women leave the party this way and end up in a living nightmare, just because Myne saw them as a threat. The Queen sought out these women and recruited them as her spies, and this particular one, whose name is Lino or Rhino depending on the translation, is the one who manages to actually get her vengeance. It's a pretty cool and satisfying moment, and I also love the way Naofumi and Lino become pretty much instant besties, and collude to talk about how much they hate Myne, while Raftalia generally looks on disapprovingly. But the downside is, of course, the resurrection mechanic. Being allied with the ones behind the waves, Myne definitely has access to resurrection, and while Naofumi and his party do generally have a way around that, because resurrection can be prevented if the soul is destroyed, and various methods including Naofumi's Soul Eater shield can achieve that, Myne's soul manages to get away before they can destroy it. She will be back, and he and Lino are determined to kill her for real when that happens. They just don't know when that will be. So that's really where we are with Myne in the light novels, and the difference between the light novel and web novel canon when it comes to her. But what do you guys think? I did kind of like the web novel version because, you know, I like a bit of edge, but the light novel version to me is a more cathartic way for her to be punished, given it's done by someone she'd wronged, and they get to see the whites of her eyes while they're beating her into ragu. The touch of it being a character we thought was unimportant, and just mentioned to characterise how evil Myne was about 18 volumes earlier, was also pretty cool in my opinion. But Aneko Yasagi, the author of Shield Hero, is really good at playing the long game when introducing characters long before their role in things is properly revealed. But let me know what you thought in the comments, and please consider subscribing if you want to see more Shield Hero content, or content about other series like Mushoku Tensei and ReZero. Thanks as always to my supporters on Patreon, and to this video's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends, as well as to everyone else who helps me out by subscribing and watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.